The thing about overhearing your own daughter say, "You've always been dead weight," is that the words don't land all at once. They settle the way snow settles, quietly, until the weight becomes impossible to ignore. I was in the bathroom down the hall from the kitchen, washing sweet potato off my hands. I'd brought a pie. Clem's mother's recipe, the one with the brown sugar and the cracked pepper crust. That sounds wrong until you taste it. The window above the sink was cracked open. It always ran warm in that house, and I could hear them perfectly. My daughter and her husband standing on the back step, voices just low enough to feel private. "She means well," Quentin said. "She means well, and she shows up every time like she's doing us a favor," my daughter said. "She's always been dead weight, Quentin. She always will be." A pause. Then she laughed, not loud, just a small, tired sound, like she'd been holding the thought so long it had fermented. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands on the guest towel, the monogrammed one I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. Then I walked back down the hall and sat down at the Thanksgiving table. I picked up my fork. Nobody at that table knew what I'd just heard. I asked my grandson how school was going. He shrugged and said fine without looking up from his phone. Max was 15 now, dark-haired like his mother, same way of holding his jaw when he didn't want to talk. I used to know how to reach him. Somewhere around 13, I stopped knowing. Quentin carved more turkey and made a joke about the Cowboys. Leona refilled her wine. She smiled at me once across the table, tight, automatic, the kind of smile that fulfills an obligation and nothing more. I stayed until 4. I washed my share of the dishes, which nobody asked me to do, but nobody stopped me either. Leona kissed my cheek at the door. "Drive safe, Mom." She was already turning back toward the living room before I reached the porch steps. The pie plate sat on the passenger seat going home, empty. I had made that pie every November since before Leona was born. She used to hover by the oven asking if it was done yet, would eat 2 slices with Cool Whip and get it on her nose. That was a long time ago. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark, not crying, just sitting. My name is Thora. I'm 67 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 32 years at Millbrook Elementary, and I know the difference between a child who doesn't understand and a child who has decided not to see you. I've known it since the first year I stood in front of a classroom. My daughter had decided not to see me. I didn't know exactly when, but sitting in that driveway, I finally let myself know it. I went inside, made chamomile tea. Didn't sleep well, but I didn't pace either. Just lay there working through the arithmetic of it all. 3 years ago, Leona called me crying. Their kitchen had a mold problem, a botched contractor, a tangled insurance claim. They needed $35,000, fast. I had it. Not easily, but I had it. 3 decades of pension contributions, summers spent tutoring other people's children, the sale of a car I'd driven until the door handle fell off. I transferred the money within the week. She cried on the phone. She said, "I don't know what we'd do without you." She signed nothing. I signed nothing. I gave it because she was my daughter, and because Clem had been gone 9 years by then, and I still felt that pull to do for them the way I'd done for everything when he was alive. The kitchen turned out beautiful. I saw it in photos. They didn't invite me to see it in person for 4 months. I got up at 6 the next morning, 1 cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table where Leona used to do her spelling homework, where Clem used to read the Sunday paper. I looked at his empty chair. "What would you do?" I said to the chair. I already knew. I called Selma at 9. Not exactly a friend, more like a woman I'd known for 20 years through the teachers' union. A retired paralegal with a mind like a filing cabinet that never lost anything. We met for coffee twice a year, talked about books and property law, which sounds strange, but that's just who she is. She told me once, "If you ever need to understand what you own and what you don't, call me before you call anyone else." I told her I had questions. "Come Thursday," she said. "Bring everything that has your name on it." I spent Wednesday pulling folders, the deed to the house, retirement account statements, the checking account my daughter had been listed on as an authorized user since 2019. I'd had minor surgery. She'd offered to help manage bills while I recovered. She never asked to be removed afterward. I never thought to ask either. I found the wire transfer confirmation from 3 years ago. just a PDF, a date and an amount. No note, no expectation of repayment on paper. Because you're my daughter, I had thought when I sent it. I read that invisible sentence to myself in the lamplight and felt something shift behind my ribs. Selma's house smelled like coffee and old newspapers, the good kind of old. She looked at everything they'd brought, asked 2 questions, made 3 notes. You can't get the $35,000 back, she said. No documentation, no agreement. It's a gift in the eyes of the law. I know, I said. But, she tapped her pen on the legal pad. You can close every door that's still open. She walked me through it. Remove Leona from the checking account. Revoke the durable power of attorney I'd updated after Clem died. The one listing my daughter as my agent should I become incapacitated. Update the will. Review the beneficiaries on my life insurance. You don't have to cut her out entirely, Selma said. Not as a recommendation, just as a fact she wanted me to have. I know, I said again. She gave me a list. I folded it in half, put it in my coat pocket, and drove home with the radio on. Something classical. I don't know what it was, but it filled the car without demanding anything from me. That night, I baked banana bread. Not for anyone. Just because I needed to do something with my hands, and the smell of it baking made the house feel less like a place where a decision had been made, and more like a place where someone still lived. On Monday, I went to my credit union on Maple Street, where I'd had an account since 1987. I asked for a manager. A polite, brisk woman pulled up my account on screen, read the name listed as authorized user, and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. I'd like her removed, I said. Completely. New login, new security questions, reissue the card in my name only. She hesitated a moment, then she began typing. While she worked, I looked at the plant on her desk. A pothos, heart-shaped leaves trailing toward the floor. I used to have one just like it in room 14, second door on the left in the east wing. Half my students called it the snake plant, because they didn't know the difference, and I'd make a small lesson out of it every year. I didn't feel victorious when I left the bank. I felt accurate, like something that had been crooked for a long time had finally been measured and corrected. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and wrote my daughter's name at the top. Then I drew one line through it, not in anger, in honesty. I called an estate attorney Selma recommended, a man named Aldous, 20 years in practice, voice on the phone steady and unhurried. He gave me an appointment for Friday. I gathered everything, the deed, property tax records, the receipt from the new roof I'd paid for in 2018, every repair invoice I'd kept in the hall closet over the years, the furnace, the gutters, the tree removal after the ice storm. 30 years of maintenance on a house I'd raised a child in alone after Clem got sick. Every receipt was a thread in a story my daughter preferred not to think about. By Thursday night, my dining table looked like the quiet war room of a woman no one had expected to resist. The phone rang twice that week. I let both go to voicemail. Leona's voice, first message. Mom, I don't know what's going on, but call me back. Second message, 2 days later, shorter. This is getting dramatic. I listened to both. Then I deleted both. I had spent years archiving her explanations like museum pieces, wrapping her dismissals in, she didn't mean it, or she's just overwhelmed. I was finished curating that collection. Friday. I put on the gray blazer I'd bought for parent-teacher conferences years ago. Aldous had a quiet office above a pharmacy on the west side of town, a ficus in the corner that had clearly been there for 20 years. I liked it immediately. I want to remove my daughter from everything, I told him, once we were seated. He listened, didn't rush, didn't argue. The house, I said. I want it in a trust. When I'm gone, I don't want it going to family. Sell it. Give the proceeds somewhere it will matter. He asked if I had a cause in mind. I did. Clem had spent 4 years on the board of a small children's literacy foundation. The kind that puts books in the hands of kids whose families can't buy them. The kind that nobody notices until it's gone. He used to drag me to their fundraisers every spring. I always pretended to complain. I never meant it. The Clem Harwood Reading Initiative, I said. He helped start it. He's my late husband. Aldous made a note and didn't ask if I was sure. He just wrote it down. We worked nearly 2 hours. When we finished, he handed me a slim binder. Everything's in order, he said. We'll file this week. I stepped outside into the cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, holding that binder against my chest. The sky was gray and still. I thought, I feel like I'm standing up straight for the first time in years. On the way home, I stopped at the pharmacy and bought a small succulent in a clay pot, just because I wanted something alive on my windowsill. That evening, just after 7, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't go to the window. I knew the engine. Quentin knocked twice, then again. Thora, his voice through the door was controlled. We need to talk. I sat on the couch with my hands in my lap and said nothing. You've been talking to lawyers. You changed the bank account. Leona doesn't understand what's happening. I looked at the wall across from me. There was a photo there. Me and Leona at her college graduation. She was 22, laughing at something off camera, her cap crooked. I had fixed it before the ceremony and she'd said, "Mom, stop fussing," and I had. And she'd grabbed my hand and squeezed it once without looking at me. I still remembered that squeeze. If this is about Thanksgiving, Quentin said through the door, just tell us what we did. We can fix it. Whatever we did, as though he didn't know. As though the backstep conversation had perhaps been carried off by the wind before it reached me. I stood, walked to the door, didn't open it. You can't fix what you didn't know you were doing, I said quietly, and you can't unsay what's already been said. Silence. Then his footsteps left the porch. I listened to the car back out of the driveway. I waited 10 minutes before I stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear down the street. Then, I went to the kitchen and made tea with 2 sugars. My neighbor Hattie came by Saturday morning with lentil soup and the thin pretext of looking for a book she thought she'd left at my place. She hadn't left any book, we both knew it. I invited her in anyway. We sat at the kitchen table and talked about her sister's new hip and whether the Mexican place on Grove Street had really improved since it changed owners. She didn't ask about Leona. She didn't ask why the hall looked more bare than usual or why there was a new lock on the back door. She just sat with me and at one point said, "You seem lighter." "I might be," I said. After she left, I went to the closet and opened the bin where I'd been keeping things for Max over the years. Graphic novels I'd thought he'd like. A deck of cards for a magic trick I'd looked up online. A small compass because he'd mentioned wanting to learn orienteering when he was 12. I'd kept adding things even as the visits grew shorter and the calls stopped. I looked at it all for a long time. Then I closed the lid and put it back on the shelf. Not emptied, just closed. That was the one thing I wasn't ready to decide. 3 weeks passed. I changed the locks, updated my medical directives with a new doctor, called Selma twice with small questions, and she answered both times without making me feel foolish for asking. Leona left 4 voicemails over those weeks. The first was confused. The second was hurt. The third was sharp, words about respect and maturity, and how she had always been there for me. I stopped the recording before it finished. The fourth was cold in a way that was almost impressive. "You're making a decision that will affect this whole family, and I want that on record." I deleted it. Then, on a Tuesday night in December, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Grandma, it's Max. I borrowed Rory's phone. I didn't know if you blocked our number. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I heard what Mom said. I was sitting right there and I didn't say anything, and I should have. I'm sorry." I read it 4 times. Then I wrote back, "I know, thank you for this." A long pause, then, "Can I come see you?" I thought about the bin in the closet. I thought about the compass. I wrote, "Saturday, come alone." He arrived on his bicycle, wearing a coat that was too thin for December because 15-year-old boys never wear the right coat. He stood on my porch, looking like he wasn't sure he'd be let in. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd knock," I said. Inside, I made hot chocolate the old way, on the stove. He sat at the table and wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't say anything for a while. I didn't fill the silence. I'd spent 67 years filling silences for people who weren't grateful for it. I was learning to let them sit. "I told my dad I was coming," he said finally. "He said to tell you they want to talk, like all of us together." "I heard you," I said. "That means no. It means I'll decide when I'm ready, and I'm not ready." He nodded slowly. He had Clem's way of nodding, the kind that means I understand, not the kind that means I agree. I used to come here all the time, he said, when I was little. I don't know when that stopped. People follow the temperature of the room they grow up in, I said. You followed your mother's temperature. That's not a crime at 15. He was quiet. Then he unzipped his backpack and took out a folded piece of paper. I drew something, he said. I know it's not good. He slid it across the table. I unfolded it. A pencil sketch, rough lines but clear. A woman sitting at a kitchen table, one hand wrapped around a cup, the other resting flat on the surface like she was claiming it. On the table beside her, a pie. That's you, he said. I can see that. You look like you're not waiting for anyone. I looked at the drawing for a long time. Then I looked at him. Can I keep this? I asked. He went a little red. It's why I brought it. He stayed 2 hours. We played gin rummy. I won both rounds. I told him about Clem's literacy fund, what it did, and why his grandfather had cared about it. Max listened in that careful way teenagers listen when they're actually paying attention and don't want you to notice they are. When he left, he hugged me on the porch. One of those unexpected teenager hugs. Quick, too tight, over before I could fully register it. I watched him pedal down the street until he turned the corner. Then I went inside and stood at the kitchen counter and let myself cry for exactly as long as I needed to. Not from regret. Not from grief about who Leona had become. But for the boy who used to fall asleep on my couch during movie nights, and for the grandmother I'd thought I was going to get to be. I let it happen. Then I washed my face and started dinner. In January, I sold the house. It happened faster than I expected. A retired couple, both former teachers, put in an offer above asking within 3 days. I took it as a sensible sign. Aldous handled the closing. I gave him power of attorney and didn't go back for the walkthrough. I had already said goodbye to the house, room by room, on a gray Sunday in December when the afternoon light came through at just the right angle and every wall looked like it had in 1994. The morning the sale closed, I was in my new apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet building on the east side of town. Small kitchen, 2 windows, a radiator that clicked pleasantly on cold nights. I'd hung Max's drawing in the living room, where the afternoon light caught the pencil line softly. Aldous called at 11. It's done, he said. I thanked him, hung up, and stood still in the middle of the room. Then I called the Clem Harwood Reading Initiative and asked to speak with the director. I took a cab downtown. I brought the check inside and handed it across her desk. She looked at the amount. Her eyes went bright in that involuntary way that can't be performed. This is extraordinary, she said. He would have wanted it here, I said. He used to say that a child who can read can go anywhere. She started to mention a plaque, a naming opportunity, some kind of recognition. Just put it toward books, I said. That's all. On the cab ride home, I watched the city go by. Gray winter sky, storefronts I knew, a school I'd driven past 1,000 times. The driver had the radio on, something I didn't recognize but with a good, easy rhythm. I felt clean, not triumphant, not righteous. Just clean, the way you feel after a long illness finally breaks and you remember what your own body feels like from the inside. That evening, I invited 3 women from my old book club over for tea. Hattie came, and 2 others I'd known for years, women who had watched my life from a respectful distance and never pried. They brought nothing. I told them not to. I baked a spice cake, just enough for 4 slices. We sat in the small living room and talked about everything except what mattered, and that was exactly right. Hattie told a story about her dentist that made us all laugh too hard. One of the others said her son-in-law had taken up pickleball and was unbearable about it. We talked about a book we'd all read 6 months ago and still hadn't agreed on. At some point, the conversation went quiet, in that way it does when women who've known each other long enough stop performing comfort and just sit inside it. I'm glad you're still here, Hattie said, not dramatically, just as a fact. I'm glad to be here, I said, and I meant both kinds of here. They stayed until 8. After they left, I washed the cups by hand and looked out the window at the dark street below. I thought about Leona, not with bitterness, with something more tired than that and more honest. She was who she was. I could not make her different by giving more. I had tried that. I had $35,000 and 32 years of Thanksgiving pies worth of evidence that I had tried. A letter came from her on a Thursday 7 weeks after the house closed. Handwritten, which surprised me. Controlled, which didn't. She wrote that she'd heard about the sale. She wrote that she felt blindsided. She wrote that she hoped, when I was ready, we could have a real conversation. She wrote that Max talked about me constantly, which she said with a strained generosity that I could tell cost her something to put on paper. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer, not the trash, not a place of honor, a drawer where it could rest without becoming a debt I owed. I didn't write back. Some things don't need a reply, they just need to be received. On the first warm day of March, I opened all 3 windows and let the air move through the apartment. The succulent on the kitchen sill had grown 2 new points since November. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I got out my journal and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "They said I'd always been dead weight." I put down the pen. I looked at what I had built since November. The trust, the donation, the new locks, the afternoons with Max, the lentil soup with Hattie, the spice cake, the cab ride home with the radio on. I picked the pen back up and wrote, "But weight is just what they called the life I was carrying without their help." I closed the journal. I put the kettle on. Outside, the street was waking up. Someone was walking a dog, a kid on a bicycle, the kind of ordinary afternoon that doesn't ask for anything except that you show up and live it, fully, in the space that finally belongs to you. I was ready to do exactly that.